She screamed his name, not mine. Her arms reached for him while the water pulled me under. The world turned to chaos, a storm of cold, crashing waves and choking silence. I remember the taste of the river, metallic, like blood and regret. I saw her face above the surface, twisted in fear, calling out for him. Not me. Not the husband who had built her a life, who had given her everything. Ethan's hand broke the surface first, and she clung to it like salvation. I kicked, desperate, but the weight of betrayal sinks faster than any stone. I didn't die that night. The water took my breath, but it gave me something far more potent, clarity. Because when the person you die for lets you drown, something inside you learns how to live differently. How to rise differently. When I look back, the cruelest part isn't that she let me drown. It's that she once made me believe I was her entire world. My name's Daniel. I design houses, quiet, solid things that don't move unless you tell them to. That's how I like my life, steady, predictable, grounded. Lydia was the chaos I welcomed into it. We met 7 years ago at a charity auction for the hospital I helped renovate. She was all bright laughter and wine-stained lips, making small talk feel like confession. I remember thinking I'd never met anyone so alive. And when someone like Lydia looks at you, really looks, you start to believe you're the reason they shine. Our mornings became little rituals. I'd grind the coffee beans, she'd hum while slicing fruit. She always left me a note before heading out, nothing grand, just, don't forget your lunch, dream builder. I'd smile every time. She had this way of making the ordinary feel sacred. Evenings were slower. We'd sit on the balcony, her head on my shoulder, and talk about futures we hadn't built yet. Children. Trips. The little bakery she said she'd open, someday, when life stops rushing. If love were a blueprint, ours felt perfectly drawn. Then Ethan showed up. It started with a message on her phone. I remember because she smiled at it longer than usual, not the quick upturn she gave for her friends or co-workers, but something softer. I asked, half joking, who's got you grinning like that? An old friend, she said. From before you and I met. He's had a rough time, divorce, job loss, all that. Ethan. The name slipped out casually, but her tone held something unspoken. He came over one evening for dinner. I still remember the sound of his laugh, too familiar, like it had once filled our home long before I existed in it. Lydia introduced us, her voice catching for just a moment. Ethan, this is Daniel. Daniel, he said, gripping my hand a little too firmly. I've heard a lot about you. Hopefully good things, I replied. The best, Lydia added quickly. That night, she laughed harder than I'd seen her laugh in months. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was something else. They had their stories, inside jokes, old memories. She'd look at him when she spoke, not at me. Just small things at first, nothing that screamed danger. Still, I noticed. But love makes you polite about pain. You teach yourself not to flinch. Ethan needed help, she said. He'd been trying to start a design firm, but funding had fallen through. You could mentor him, Lydia suggested one night as we lay in bed, her voice soft, persuasive. You're good at that sort of thing. And because I loved her, because she asked, I said yes. Soon, Ethan and I were working side by side on small projects. He was charming in that effortless way some men are, confident, quick with compliments. He called Lydia LYD sometimes. A nickname I'd never heard from anyone else's lips. She didn't correct him. Over time, I started seeing their bond in the little spaces between words. The way she'd laugh when he texted. How her eyes would follow him out of a room. I told myself it was friendship, old familiarity. After all, she came home to me. She still kissed me goodnight. She still said, I love you, Danny. But every time she said it, a small, nameless fear stirred inside me, like something fragile beginning to crack. Once, during dinner, I mentioned that Ethan seemed to rely on her too much. She set her fork down and frowned. "He's been through a lot," she said. "You don't know what it's like losing everything." "I'm not saying don't help him," I replied. "I'm saying, maybe there should be limits." She looked at me for a long moment, eyes cool, unreadable. "You don't have to be jealous of everyone who needs me, Daniel." The word stung. I didn't argue. Instead, I took her hand and said quietly, "I just don't want to lose us." She squeezed my fingers and smiled that gentle, practiced smile. "You won't." But something in her eyes didn't match the words. The truth is, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love, once built, couldn't be broken. That loyalty was enough. What I didn't know then was that sometimes love doesn't collapse like a house, it erodes like a shoreline. Slowly. Silently. Until one day, you look around and realize everything solid has slipped into the sea. Ethan began showing up so often it felt like the spare key had been made for him. At first, it was practical. We were working together, after all. He'd stop by to discuss blueprints or check project timelines. Then it became coffee in the morning, dinner at night, and somehow his laughter started living in our kitchen long after he'd left. Lydia insisted it was harmless. "He's lonely," she said. "You of all people should understand what that feels like, working late, no one to talk to." I nodded, because she was right. My work did keep me distant sometimes. I told myself this was her way of giving him what I couldn't. But small things started to rearrange themselves in my mind. One night, I walked into the living room to find them sitting on the floor, sorting through old records. The light from the lamp caught in her hair, and she laughed at something he said, one of those private laughs that comes from remembering who you were before life made you careful. She looked beautiful at that moment. But she didn't look at me. I stood there a little too long before she noticed. "Danny," she said brightly, "we were just talking about that concert we went to back in college." Ethan grinned. "Yeah, Lydia was the only one who convinced me to dance. Remember that?" She smiled. "He was terrible." I managed a polite laugh, though something sharp pressed behind my ribs. A week later, I found her phone buzzing on the counter. The screen lit up with his name, Ethan, followed by a heart emoji I hadn't seen before. A stupid emoji. I stared at it longer than I should have, until the screen dimmed back to black. When she came in, she noticed my expression. "What?" "Nothing," I said too quickly. She picked up the phone, glanced at it, and smiled faintly. "He's asking about the site meeting tomorrow. Didn't he just leave here an hour ago?" Her tone hardened. "He's thorough, Daniel. Not everyone runs on your schedule." That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. Every inhale sounded like a secret she wasn't ready to tell. The next few weeks blurred into small inconsistencies. Perfume, something floral, lingered in the car one morning. Not Lydia's usual scent. When I mentioned it, she laughed. "I sprayed a tester at the mall yesterday." "You're paranoid." Then there were the messages that made her smile at dinner, the long silences she'd fill by scrolling through her phone while I talked. One evening, I came home early and heard music from the kitchen. They were cooking together. Lydia stood by the stove, Ethan chopping vegetables beside her. They looked comfortable. Intimate in a way that belonged to people who'd done this 1,000 times before. I paused at the doorway. She turned, surprised. "You're home early." Guess the meeting wrapped faster than I thought. Perfect timing, Ethan was just helping me with dinner. "Smells good," I said, though I couldn't taste anything after that. During dinner, they shared a joke I didn't understand. Something about a coffee spill in sophomore year. They laughed, eyes locked across the table. I laughed too, late and hollow. After he left, Lydia started cleaning up, humming under her breath. I leaned against the counter. You two seem close. She looked up. He's easy to talk to. I remember when you used to say that about me. Her eyes flickered. Don't start, Daniel. I'm not starting. I'm just saying it feels different. You're imagining things. She set down the dish towel, came closer, and placed her hands on my chest. You've been stressed. Work, deadlines, don't make problems where there aren't any. Her touch softened me, as it always did. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Still, doubt doesn't disappear, it hides. I began catching myself watching them at work. Ethan would lean in close when showing her something on the screen, and she'd laugh in that low, genuine way she hadn't used with me in months. When I walked up, they'd straighten, pretending nothing had happened. Once, during a meeting, Ethan joked, if Lydia hadn't turned me down years ago, maybe I'd be the one stuck fixing these budget sheets. Lydia rolled her eyes but smiled. You couldn't handle me back then. Their voices mingled with that easy warmth that comes from shared history. Mine didn't fit there. After the meeting, I pulled Ethan aside. Don't cross lines you can't redraw. He smirked. Relax, Daniel. I'm not trying to steal your wife. I didn't say you were. You didn't have to. That night, Lydia noticed I was quiet. She slid into bed beside me, brushing her fingers against my arm. What's going on with you lately? Nothing. You barely talk anymore. Maybe I'm just tired of talking to walls. Her brows knit. What's that supposed to mean? It means I don't know where you go when you look at me lately. She sighed, sitting up. Daniel, you're being paranoid again. Am I? Because I see how he looks at you. He's a friend. Then why do I feel like I'm losing my wife every time he's around? For a moment, she just stared at me. Then her face softened in that careful way people use when they're deciding whether to lie. She reached for my hand. I love you. Stop letting your imagination ruin what we have. Then tell me I'm wrong. You are. Her certainty should have comforted me. Instead, it felt rehearsed. When she turned away to sleep, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The smell of her shampoo mixed with that faint floral perfume again, not hers, not mine. The scent of a stranger living quietly in our home. I started checking my phone during breaks, half expecting a message that would prove my fears real. None came. That almost made it worse. The absence felt deliberate, like they'd learned how to hide better. Ethan began borrowing her time in small doses. Can Lydia help me review these designs? Can she stop by the office to sign something? Always harmless. Always justified. Each favor carved another piece from the life I'd built with her. One afternoon, I drove past a cafe near the waterfront and saw them sitting by the window. She was laughing, the kind of laugh that lifts her whole face. Ethan leaned in, whispering something that made her cover her mouth in mock embarrassment. I pulled over but didn't go in. I watched until they left. When she came home later, she said she'd spent the day running errands. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. Love, I've learned, doesn't die cleanly. It rots from within, leaving you guessing which part is still alive. I began questioning myself more than her. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe jealousy was just another kind of insecurity. Lydia had never given me a reason not to trust her before. She noticed my distance and tried to pull me back. Dinners, movie nights, even a weekend trip she suggested spontaneously. We need this, she said. A reset. On that trip, she was perfect, attentive, affectionate, playful even. For a few days, I believed we were finding our way back. But last night, when she went to shower, her phone buzzed again. I glanced at it without meaning to. The preview showed one message before it disappeared. Ethan, I miss you already. I froze. The bathroom door opened, steam curling out. She smiled when she saw me holding her phone. "Who's that from?" I asked quietly. She didn't flinch. "Work stuff." "Work?" "Yes, Daniel. Work. I miss you already. Sound like business talk to you?" She sighed, taking the phone from my hand. "You're exhausted sometimes, you know that." "I'm just asking." "You're accusing." "Maybe because I can feel something's wrong and you keep pretending it isn't." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed softly, not kindly. "You're losing it," she said. "You've built this whole story in your head because you can't stand the thought that I might have a friend who understands me. Understand you better than your husband?" Her expression cooled. "If you keep pushing me away, Daniel, one day I won't bother coming back." The room went silent. Steam from the shower hung between us like fog on water, thick, suffocating. I wanted to shout, to demand the truth, but her calmness disarmed me. It always did. She kissed my cheek, whispered, "I love you," and slipped into bed. I sat there for hours, staring at the glow of the phone screen on the nightstand. By the time she fell asleep, my chest felt hollow. I told myself love was about trust, that marriage meant choosing belief over doubt. But as I watched her turn in her sleep, a cold realization crept in: I wasn't choosing belief anymore. I was clinging to denial. And denial, I was beginning to learn, is just love's quieter form of drowning. It was supposed to be a weekend of healing, Lydia's idea, though it felt more like a peace offering. "Let's get away," she said, "just us. No work, no phones, no Ethan." She said his name with a smile too light, as if saying it was proof she had nothing to hide. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe us. We drove north, the sea winding beside the road like a dark ribbon. Lydia played old songs from when we first met, humming along. Every few miles she'd glance at me, squeezing my hand, like she was reminding herself how to play the part. By the time we reached the cabin by the lake, I had convinced myself that this trip could fix everything. The first night was easy. Too easy. We cooked together, laughed about the bad mattress, even fell asleep tangled up the way we used to. I remember thinking, maybe the storm had finally passed. But storms, I've learned, don't end because you want them to. They end when they've taken what they came for. The next morning, I woke early. The sky was gray, the lake restless. Lydia was still asleep, her hair spilled across the pillow. I made coffee, the way she liked it, 2 sugars, no cream, and stepped outside. Her phone sat on the porch table. Normally, I wouldn't touch it. But it buzzed once, lighting up with a name I'd spent months trying to ignore. Ethan. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe curiosity. Maybe self-preservation. I unlocked it, her code hadn't changed. My hands shook as I opened the thread. At first, it was harmless. Work talk, small jokes. Then I scrolled higher. I still think about us. I never stopped, LYD. You said you chose stability, but I know you missed the fire. Her reply, don't do this, Ethan. Then why are you answering me at 2 a.m.? Because I can't sleep. Because you still love me. Maybe I never stopped. My stomach turned. My pulse drowned out the sound of the waves. The latest message was sent just before we left home. Come back to me. You don't have to keep pretending. And her reply, the one that shattered everything. After this weekend, I'll know what I want. I set the phone down as if it had burned me. My reflection stared back at the black screen, someone I barely recognized. When Lydia came out, still in her robe, she smiled. You're up early. Yeah, I said quietly. I couldn't sleep. She kissed my cheek. You worry too much. I guess I do. I wanted to scream, worry. I've been living in worry. But instead, I asked if she wanted to go for a drive. The words came out calm, steady, almost detached. "Sure," she said. We drove along the lakeshore that afternoon. The rain began halfway through, turning the road slick, the world gray. Lydia rolled down her window, letting the wind whip her hair. "You okay?" she asked. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About whether love changes," I said. She laughed softly. "Of course it does. That's what makes it real." "Or maybe it just dies," I murmured. She looked at me sharply. "Why would you say that?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because if I started, I wouldn't stop. By evening, the rain had turned into a storm. We were supposed to head back to the cabin, but Lydia wanted to take a short detour across the old bridge overlooking the river. "The view's incredible when it rains," she said. Ethan called as we parked. She didn't answer, but the screen lit up bright enough for me to see. "Go ahead," I said. "He might miss you." Her eyes flickered. "It's work, Daniel." "Does he call you LYD at work, too?" "Stop." "Or text you about missing the fire?" Her face went pale. "You looked through my phone." I looked at the truth. "God, Daniel. After this weekend, you'll know what you want," I said, repeating her message. "So. Do you?" Rain drummed against the windshield. Lightning flashed across her face, tears or rain, I couldn't tell. She swallowed hard. "He was my first everything. You were my stability." The words hit like a blade. I stared at her, unblinking. "So what am I now? Just a quiet place where you rest between storms?" She shook her head, eyes shining. "You don't understand. With him, I feel. With you, I'm safe." I thought I wanted safety, but... She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The silence between us was louder than the storm outside. When we turned back toward the cabin, the bridge trembled beneath the rain. Water roared below, the river swollen from the downpour. Ahead of us, through the sheets of rain, headlights appeared, another car, coming fast, too close to the center. Lydia gasped. "Daniel!" I swerved, tires skidding. The world spun, metal, water, sky. The guardrail shattered. For a moment, we were weightless. Then we hit the water. The shock stole my breath. Freezing black swallowed everything, the world, the noise, her voice. I fought upward, lungs screaming. My hand broke the surface first, grabbing for air, for light, for her. "Lydia!" I choked out. Through the rain, I saw them, her and Ethan. He'd been in the other car. I didn't even realize it until now. He was bleeding, dazed, but alive. Lydia was next to him, struggling to pull him free from the wreck. "Lydia!" I called again, louder this time. She turned, her eyes found me. For one suspended second, everything stopped. Then she made her choice. She reached for Ethan. I watched her drag him onto a piece of debris, holding his head above the water, screaming his name over the storm. She didn't look back. Not once. I kicked, desperate, but the current pulled harder. My arms burned, my lungs filled with water. Every instinct screamed to live, to fight, but betrayal weighs more than anything. Her voice carried faintly through the wind. "Hold on, Ethan. Not Daniel. Never Daniel." I went under. The world turned cold and silent. In those last moments, I thought of our mornings, coffee, laughter, her hand tracing circles on my wrist. All of it collapsing into nothing. I didn't think death would feel like this. Not rage. Not peace. Just a quiet understanding, that love, no matter how deeply built, can still be washed away in a single, deliberate choice. As the water pressed in around me, I saw her face one last time, blurred by the storm. She wasn't crying. She looked almost relieved. And that was when I stopped fighting. The river closed over me, and the world went black. I should have drowned. That sentence could have closed the whole story. Instead it became the hinge. I remember the shock of cold, the smell of diesel and wet metal, the way the river tried to claim me like it had a right to everything that had ever disappointed it. They pulled bodies from that water that night. They pulled my face from a current and called it loss. Lydia put flowers in my hands at a funeral and kissed Ethan in the back pew. She spoke at the service, her voice was steady. She said things about my kindness, about how I'd always been the safe harbor. The words were full and hollow. I did not stop them. I let them believe I was gone. There are easier lies than vanishing. There are lazier revenge plots than the one I chose. But I wanted it to hurt. I wanted to regret my weight in the future. I wanted Lydia to keep carrying the image of my corpse, of the man she let sink. For months I lived in two kinds of silence. The first was practical, lying still in a hospital mattress while they sewed my leg, while medical staff stitched up what they found, a laceration, hypothermia, a fractured rib. The rescue team had pulled a stranger from the mud. He had no ID. He had no past. He had a name the nurses could not remember. I watched them wool me away and I listened while they assumed things. I didn't correct them. The second silence was something sharper. In that small bed, with a blanket pulled to my chin, the shape of my plan formed like an architecture drawing. I'd always been a builder by trade, lines and stresses and loads. I knew how things fell apart when one support was removed. I built houses people trusted. Now I would build a life that let me burn the houses down from the inside. I started with a false death certificate. I will not lie about the practicalities. I bribed, I begged, I bartered information from people who thought they were owed for their kindness. The hospital had sloppy record-keeping for unidentified patients. The rescue team was more interested in coverage than follow-up. A body that washed in with no friend claiming it, no ID, and a middle name that didn't match the man they buried, it was easy to let the machine roll. They named me Daniel Whitaker in the paper. Lydia read the obituary and cried over someone I had been, not someone I still was. When the funeral ended and the crowd thinned, I stepped into an ambulance that went to a different clinic. I breathed with emotion my chest had almost forgotten. I let them close me in bandages and lie about my age and background. They cleaned the salt and the mud from me and offered me a bed and the price of a new identity. The first year was all survival. A sparse apartment in a city far from the lake. Occasional work under another name, freelance design consults, small restoration jobs, anything that kept money moving without drawing attention. I learned how to speak with a different cadence. I bought glasses that softened my face. I changed my gait. I made myself forget the small, domestic rhythms that had been mine, the exact way Lydia stirred her coffee, the way she tucked hair behind her ear when she was thinking. Those things hurt like shrapnel. I scraped them away. But pity is a poor architect. You can survive on pity only so long before you need structure. I wanted not only to survive but to be effective. So I used what I had always had, craft, precision, patience. Architecture teaches you to read a building's bones. I could read people the same way. Lydia and Ethan had built a life on certain supports, a shared social network, a business venture that relied on reputation, and the public narrative of the man who died. To collapse them, I needed to pry out their hidden beams, the things no obituary could reach. First step, information. I traced their new life like a surveyor. Ethan's firm had lingered, maybe a little too long in the light. He and Lydia had a joint account that turned up in a property registry. A picture here, a tagged post there. Old clients of mine who'd hired Ethan's firm after I left. I called them, offered consulting help. Flattering their ego is the oldest hack in the book. People like to think strangers want their story for virtue. I learned what mattered to them. I watched how Lydia walked into a room now, confident in a different currency. They'd leaned on each other after the accident. Everyone gave condolences, then a few months later, applause. Lydia had moved through the same calendar of public mourning as everyone else. She had been praised for strength. Ethan had been praised for bravery. They were careful in public, precise. That precision would be my map. Money came next. I could have stolen it. I could have wrecked them and walked away. But I didn't want a cheap gut punch. I wanted a surgical strike. I needed access. So I built it. Small investments under assumed names. A shell company. A string of accounts linked to businesses they trusted. I found old clients who remembered my sensible forecasting and offered small loans to me, for a startup, money that flowed through an unremarkable chain until it became my quiet capital. I did not hurry. Revenge is a long span, it needs a strong beam. What I did with that capital was make myself indispensable. I contacted a contractor Ethan used often, pretending to be a regional consultant for a firm that specialized in structural retentions for waterfront properties. I knew the lingo, I used it like a stethoscope, listening to the creaks in their lives. I offered services that seemed practical, a re-evaluation of projects, a soft audit of accounts, a private consultation about water mitigation for properties their clients were buying. I spoke the right words: risk management, long-term liability, insurance nuance. People listened. I built a company that looked like an ally. My invoices were reasonable. My proposals were thorough. I worked for months in the background, submitting reports with alarming clarity. I found a way to be in their inboxes like weather, constant and ignored until ignored became costly. Parallel to that practical infiltration, I began the quieter, crueler work, the psychological architecture. Lydia had been cruelly efficient at convincing me of things. I learned the same art. Anonymous notes at first. Postcards sent with no return address. A press clipping placed under her windshield wiper. Little reminders that water remembers. A photograph of the bridge at dusk. A scrap of fabric. The notes were never explicit threats. They were questions in the dark. Do you remember the sound? Do you remember whose hand you chose? I wanted her mind to be a house with one light left on at night, always aware of the chill. I never yelled. The anonymous voice was clinical. The messages arrived like drafts that made the curtains move, so she could not tell whether the cold came from inside or out. And I used water like an instrument. Not like a weapon of blunt force. Water can do softer things. It can shift foundations, cause a leak behind drywall, ruin a client presentation when the projector shorts out because of humidity in the room you control. I learned about municipal systems. I found which pipes fed the downtown offices where Ethan held meetings. I knew where a small flood could embarrass him and not be traced. I knew which documents would be destroyed if they were stored in the wrong place. I knew how reputations unspooled, not in a single dramatic show, but in whispers after a cancelled launch, after a failed inspection, after a client who thought twice. The first public stumble was small and surgical. A grant application. Ethan's firm had been counting on failed inspection because a CAD file had been corrupted. The corruption didn't look like sabotage at first glance. It looked like a clerical error. But it forced Ethan to delay a purchase. The delay cost them a client who went elsewhere. The client would later say, irritated in an interview, that reliability is everything. Word spread, the kind of small lie that grows when repeated. Parallel to that, the anonymous notes pushed Lydia. I wanted guilt to be a constant ache. I wanted to be in her dreams, the way she had been in mine at night when she left a burner on. So I sent emails from a philanthropic account that hinted at knowledge of the accident's details. Not accusations. Just poetic lines: rivers keep their own counsel. Some decisions float long after bodies sink. I never signed my name. I wanted her mind to match the river, restless and remembering. There were moments I almost broke. I found myself cleaning coffee mugs from a rented apartment and catching my own reflection. Twice I almost answered. Twice I let memories of her hand on my chest and that desperate, late-night weeping at the funeral make me falter. Old love is a stronger language than any plan. I woke in the dark with the ache of it. I let it wash over me, then moved on. I told myself that what I was doing was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was true with teeth. It was making her live inside the aftermath she had given me. Notably, I never killed the man. Ethan was never meant to be a corpse in my conscience. He was a tool for revealing an ethical truth, that choices have consequences. I wanted them to feel unstable in the currency they traded in, public trust, clients, invitations. I wanted Lydia's smile to become a calculation. Small things became the grain of a larger ruin. A water leak that forced a high-profile client to cancel a gala. A late-night message to Lydia from an account that knew intimate details, a memory only someone from the accident could have. A bank flagged for irregular transfers because my shell companies moved funds in ways that tightened their access to lines of credit. Each event was a small press against a seam. Meanwhile, I built a life that looked stable. Charity donations. Networked acquaintances. Invitations to panels on waterfront resiliency. I became a sensible consultant who knew tide lines and moral lines. They invited me to speak. They trusted me implicitly. I let them. I let their guard down. The more I infiltrated, the more Lydia changed. She began to look over her shoulder in subtle ways. The notes had worked like a slow leak. Ethan grew defensive and then angry in private, the kind of anger that shows up in meetings as clipped sentences and a tight jaw. He lashed out at assistants. He missed a payment to a contractor who later spoke ill of him to a client. The ripple became a current. And still, sometimes, when the night pressed against the windows and the city lights made ladders of the rain, I would remember her hand reaching for Ethan instead of me. That precise, absurdly human choice. It made my face contort into something feral and small. When doubts came, I'd sit by a window and trace the water's path on the glass with my finger. The mark would smear, then dry. The river had taught me patience. The water told me exactly how to move. They chose the riverfront for the launch. Of course they did. Ethan loved symbolism, Lydia loved the kind of places that made people believe in second acts. The pavilion jutted like an honest promise over the water, glass, light, and the soft thrum of the river underneath. It was the perfect stage for a company that sold dreams of waterfront living. I took my place in that audience as someone they trusted. Marcus Hale, specialist in coastal resilience. A man with a tidy suit, a practiced smile, a history of grants and endorsements. I had slid into that skin like any other building material, measured, useful, comfortable. They welcomed me because I'd been helpful before. They invited me on panels. They signed my guest list. They handed me the microphone and the light. Lydia saw me before the applause quieted. She was standing near the back, a champagne glass in one hand, Ethan's arm around her waist. Her posture was composed, fear showed like a shadow under her eyes. I watched her reach up and smooth a curl from her temple, the same motion she'd used in our kitchen that night she told me Ethan was her fire. For an absurd, terrible second my heart forgot the engineering of revenge and hammered like an old rhythm. Then I remembered the patient logic of what I'd built. Breathe. Stay precise. This was not for spectacle. This was for ruin with a face they couldn't forget. I rose when they introduced me. The room hummed polite interest. Cameras leaned in. My voice, when it came out, sounded like any consultant's, even, crisp, translated grout and steel into metaphors excited clients liked. I want to congratulate Ethan and Lydia, I began. You've turned a plan into a promise. It's what we all chase. Applause. I set my notes down in front of me, because nothing human is as convincing as someone who doesn't need a script but uses one anyway. I told the usual stories, the risk, the vision, the number of meetings that had led to this launch. I spoke about how waterfront properties require trust more than anything else. People buy what they believe will stand up to tides and time. I smiled when I said it. My face was a blueprint of placidity. Then I did something smaller and more intimate. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folded scrap of paper. I didn't look at Ethan or the room. I looked at Lydia. "You once left a note on a kitchen counter," I said, voice low enough that only some would hear. "You called someone dream builder. Told him not to forget his lunch." I paused. The way I said it was an old cadence, her cadence, the one that used to make her laugh and make me blush. Her face went slack. She mouthed, "Danny," like a prayer or a curse. The color drained from her cheeks until she looked nearly transparent. Ethan's hand tightened on her waist in the same way a man grips a ledge. The room hadn't yet realized the temperature change. Not until I unfolded the paper and placed it under the stage light. A small, coffee-smudged line of handwriting they'd once thought private. Not dramatic on its own, the phrase alone meant nothing to anyone else. But it was a private key. A nickname. A lock picked with a single word. Lydia's breath hitched. Her lips trembled. For a moment she looked like someone who had been caught saying a prayer she didn't mean. "That's not my place," Ethan said, suspicious, stepping forward. "Who are you?" I smiled. I told a story instead. I explained that I had been a consultant in previous projects near the river, that I'd audited leakage risks, building compliance, the kind of technical nitty-grit that insurers loved. I let them breathe the truth. I'd been in their files. I'd been the ghost at their table. They relaxed a fraction. Arrogance is a protective thing for those who have not learned fear. Then the small, precise collapse began. First came the screens. The projection system, the centerpiece of Ethan's reveal, fizzled and died. It was an odd failure. The technicians looked at their consoles and swore that everything was connected. The hall went dark in a technical sigh. Someone cursed. A projector flickered back only to blow an expensive fuse with a thunderclap that echoed off the glass. Next, the river made its small return. A sprinkler line, one that had been quietly rerouted weeks prior during a routine inspection I'd arranged under my consulting name, tripped in the lower storage closet. Water hissed into the wrong conduit and then into a cable tray. The sound was just a whisper at first, like someone undoing a zipper, until it became an audible, urgent presence. Guests shuffled. Waiters mopped. The staff's faces tightened. I watched Lydia's face when the first document started to wrinkle. Her company's lovely brochures, the ones with the glossy renderings of sunlit terraces, bloomed like wet flowers across a mahogany table. A client near the front picked one up and let it drip through his fingers. That single image, a finished vision turning limp and useless, is the kind of thing investors remember. Then the emails began. My team, anonymous accounts I'd seeded into their professional network, released a single, damning file to a journalist on site. A confidential audit, flagged for immediate review. The headline read like a cold verdict, questions raised over financial transfers at Lyde, waterfront developer. The room stiffened. Conversation fell into a tentative silence, heavy and aware. Ethan's face moved through stages, disbelief, color loss, fury. He stepped up to the podium and shouted for explanations. He demanded audits, credentials. He sounded like a man trying to claw his way back to normal. I waited. "You look like a ghost, Lydia," I said quietly as I walked toward her. The cameras caught my movement, the room tilted toward drama. She searched for the source of my voice. Her eyes found mine, and the small lie in them cracked. "How did you?" Her voice was small. "You chose him when I needed you," I said. My words were simple, not theatrical. There was no flourish to them. I let the world believe I drowned. I let it bury a man who was very much alive beneath the things you wanted him to be remembered for. A few people murmured. Ethan's jaw clenched so tight I thought I heard steel. She stumbled back as if someone had pushed her. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "You're not being subtle," I said. "You told me once that when you wanted someone to feel safe, you gave them stability. You told him he was fired, and you told me I was harbor." The memory was a dagger. She looked as if she might faint. At that, the lawyer from their firm rose, microphone shaking. "We will have this investigated." "This is slander," he started. "And you should," I said. "Investigate." I let loose what I had gathered in months of watching, of patience. I laid out a chain of transfers in clinical language, amounts moved, shell companies set up under plausible business names, invoices that circled their accounts like a bleak hymn. I didn't dramatize. Numbers do the drama for you. The audience heard figures and the pause in the room deepened into a collective inhale. Phones out. Journalists leaned forward. Someone murmured. Ethan's face lost the last of its color. He attacked me with words: liar, saboteur, phantom. He called security. They came, a bland wall of duty. Lydia stood by as if rooted. Her hand had gone to her mouth. Outside on the quay, police lights flashed, the red and blue bleeding over the water. Someone from the press had a camera rolling. The rumor mill met the evidence I'd set like bait. By the time the event dispersed in controlled chaos, 3 of their major investors were on phones they hadn't expected to need again. Clients who had been ready to sign retreated politely. Contracts were put on hold pending forensic accounting. The cascade went faster than a man's words. Reputation, once questioned, is hard to stitch back. They cried betrayal. They accused me of theatrics. They shouted about legal recourse. They were wrong in how they attacked it. This was not an act of revenge done in a single strike. It was composed the way I composed houses: measure, countermeasure, redundancy. I'd given them enough to wobble their foundation. I had not broken it in a single swell. I left that to water, to audits, to whispers. As the crowd thinned, Lydia approached. Her face was pale, mascara streaked. She kept searching my expression for a hint of the man she'd once trusted. For the slightest tremor that might have once been his. "You're alive," she said, a statement more than a question. "Yes," I said. My voice was several rooms removed from the old one. I let her feel the absence. I chose to live. She reached for me, a reflex of the old days. Her fingers brushed my sleeve. She found the cuff of a jacket I always wore. I allowed myself a small, private brutality. I pressed the scrap of paper I'd used on the stage into her palm, the note she'd written with the coffee-stained edge. Her fingers closed around it like a child grasping a talisman. "You could have come home," she whispered. Her voice came out small and raw. "Why didn't you?" "Because," I said, and I looked out at the river where the night had been kinder to me than she had. "You already chose." She made a sound that was half lament, half rage. Ethan moved to stand between us, and I watched as his confidence drained into something brittle and minor. He was a man whose empire had just had a hairline fracture exposed. He would spend the next months trying to convince himself he was not sinking. I left then, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the spill of cameras. I walked away from the water and toward the city's anonymous alleys where my new life had wait. Behind me, the echo of their world began to collapse in slow, professional ways: fund withdrawals, client cancellations, an inquiry opened by an insurer. I had not killed them. I had not broken their bodies. I had unraveled the things that kept them tethered to power. The river had not done my work for me in the end. I had. On the pavement beneath my shoes, the rain had left a trace that looked like a memory. I stepped over it. My hands smelled faintly of river and ink and the coffee stain that had once been tender. They would remember that night. They would remember that their celebration had become a spectacle of exposure. They would remember who had stood up and said, quietly, "I am not dead." The crowd had scattered, leaving echoes instead of applause. Reporters' voices blended with the wind, the sound of shutters and questions fading into the hum of the river. The same river. It caught light from the city and shimmered like a quiet witness. I stopped at the edge of the pier and looked down. The water was dark and steady, folding around the reflection of the building that had just collapsed in reputation. I felt the cool air lift off it and settle on my face. It didn't smell of iron anymore. It smelled clean, the way a wound smells after it's closed. Behind me, I heard her. Daniel. The name came out sharp, splintered by panic. Once, that sound had been my salvation. Once, I would have turned. I would have fought the current to answer it. But not now. Daniel, please. Her heels clattered against the boards. I kept walking. The boards flexed under my shoes, each step measured, quiet. She called again, and I could hear the crack in her throat. The tone matched my own, the night the water took me. Funny. How memory loops back, demanding symmetry. I reached the railing and laid my hand on the cool steel. Beneath it, the current whispered, patient as breath. I leaned just enough to see the ripples shift. The same river that had almost killed me now carried her reflection, a woman hollowed out by the realization that she had resurrected her own ghost. Her voice broke behind me. "What do you want from me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Everything she'd ever valued had already begun to unravel, quietly, efficiently, irreversibly. The water below rippled once more, and I imagined the last image she'd ever seen of me, my hand reaching for her before it vanished beneath the surface. I turned my head just slightly so she could see my profile, the faint outline of the man she had let go. "This time," I said softly, "when you reach for me." I paused, listening to her breath hitch, the sound of disbelief and horror mixing in her throat. "I'll let you drown in your own guilt." Then I walked into the city lights, leaving her there, alone with the water, and the ghost she created.